Thank you very much, John, and it's great to be here. I must say it's my first time in Achill, John, and I'm really delighted to be here. And as you know, we organised, I'm on the board of Green Foundation Ireland, and we are a sister organisation of the Heinrich Böll Foundation in Germany. And Heinrich Böll Foundation is a huge organisation, has lots of resources. We're, relatively small, but we did manage, when Jan Philipp Albrecht became the co-president of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, he said, along with René Böll, that he would like to visit Ireland. And so we organised that, and it was a fantastic few days. He went all around Ireland. He started off with Gisela down in University of Limerick, and then he came up here to Achill and had a fantastic time up here. The sun was shining, sky was blue, went all over the place, and was wowed by this place. And I know René himself sees this as his second home, and René was delighted. We then took them up to Belfast, and I met them up in Belfast, took them up to the Peace Wall, and they saw the reality of the challenges that we face on this island. And as a result of that, we produced this magazine, Reconnecting with Böll, because René always had the feeling that somehow the Heinrich Böll Foundation was kind of losing its way slightly, and the connection with Böll, and I must remember it started off with Heinrich Böll himself, who founded that they wanted to reconnect. So this magazine, which is there available free of charge at the back, is all about, it has a number of essays from people showing the significance of Heinrich Böll here in Ireland. So I would just ask you maybe just to take a look at that, because there are some fantastic contributions. And so when John asked me to speak here, I was delighted to do so. But I was also a little bit apprehensive because, I said, look, what I want to talk about and it is probably going against the grain a little bit, and if you don't want me to go there, I won't do it. But he said, please go ahead, because that's what this weekend is all about. And I was, I have to say, encouraged by what I heard last night from some of the speakers when Lindsay was speaking. And by the way, it's a pity that I wanted to go to Lindsay's thing, so I couldn't bunk off, and say I'm not speaking here today. And I'm sure lots of other people are down there. But what Lindsay there talked about, the bulwark of freedom, and likewise. I just saw the ambassador, the deputy ambassador, passing by there. Is he trying to get in the door there by any chance? Oh, here he comes. Yeah. Not at all. I should have addressed you as deputy ambassador at the very start. You're very welcome. And I was just saying, Christian, I was very encouraged by your words last night when you started to talk about otherness and looking at these grey areas, right? Because that's exactly what I want to do here today. I want to if you like, indulge in an exploration, throwing out ideas. The Americans have this terrible word, spitballing, going out there and looking at and see where it takes us. And it's a sort of a Buddhist approach. It's not going to be, laced with certainty, because one of the luxuries of being a former politician is that I suppose you can enjoy the luxury of uncertainty. And I remember actually, and I see Catherine Meenan down there, I said to Catherine I was going to mention her former boss, John Bruton, and I remember meeting John after he had left politics, met on the street, and I knew him obviously very well over the years. And I said, any regrets, John, how are you enjoying it? He said, no, he says, it's fantastic, he said, it's great, it's a great relief. Because, he said, especially in opposition, there's only so much indignation that you can work up in a day, right? Indignation and certainty, because particularly when you're in opposition, you have to talk with him and say, this government is an absolute disgrace. And, use your finger. I was pretty good at all of that. And that's, that's it. You have to project this idea of total certainty of your opinions, always. If you go on the 1 o'clock news and you're being interviewed by Brian Dobson, and he asks you a question, you have to come forward with a certain view. And the fact of the matter is that sometimes, you can't say, when he asks you a question, you know what, I'm not so sure, maybe they do have a point. It's just that's just not possible. And likewise, when you're in government, you have to dismiss the opposition as complete idiots. They don't know what they're talking about. And so you get, from the very start, you get a polarization. That's the problem. And it's that spirit of Heinrich Böll that you talked about, Deputy Ambassador, last night, that I want to invoke today. And I thought I'd start with a quote because, as I said, I'm on the board of Green Foundation Ireland. And a number of weeks ago, we had a talk by a mediator, someone who is looking to start a dialogue, particularly between these polarised versions, the farming community here in Ireland and the Green movement. And as you know, there are severe difficulties. But he said he wanted to look at, as a former senior counsel, he was very interested in the work of a certain judge in the United States. And he quoted from the judge, and I'd like to quote it to you here today. This is an extract from the speech on the spirit of liberty by Judge Learned Hand, spoken during the Second World War. Hand was considered the greatest judge never to have been appointed to the US Supreme Court. And he said the following: "What then is the spirit of liberty? I cannot define it. I can only tell you my own faith. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which is not too sure that it is right. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which seeks to understand the mind of other men and other women. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which weighs their interests alongside its own without bias. The spirit of liberty remembers that not even a sparrow falls to earth unheeded." And I think that is very much in line with the spirit of Heinrich Böll, that allows people to express views, freedom of thought. We're trying to empathize with the point of view of other people. And the question I would ask today, and it's a hard question to answer, is this: how would Heinrich Böll have reacted to contemporary events? It's very difficult to know, but I look around this room and I see the photographs and I recognize some of the people in the photographs. I see him there with Petra Kelly. I knew Petra Kelly very well, as my colleague Tommy Simpson. We knew her well, along with Gert Bastian, came to Ireland. And I was in Germany. And this is like, I've heard this over the last few years. This line that the Russians are now posing an unprecedented threat to the West. They've never posed this threat before. That's not how I recall it, frankly. Because I was in Germany during the early 1980s. I was actually, believe it or not, working in the fossil fuel industry as a coal miner in the Ruhr Valley. A terrible job, but I got to know Germany. I got to know the German people. I was working on the building sites. And then in 1983, we had this terrible situation in Germany where the American president, Ronald Reagan, a man I hold responsible for a lot of things, believe it or not, the man who gave us the phrase, "Make America Great Again." You ever hear that phrase? Anyway, he was going to put in these middle-range rockets, Pershing 2, as it was known at the time, and it was going to be stationed in Germany. Now, this was the only topic of conversation in Germany at this time. I remember an Irish friend and I remarking that the only things, the Germans seemed completely obsessed, people in our circle, they were only obsessed with two things: relationships and war. Because they would talk constantly about Beziehungen and talk constantly about Krieg, and then they talk about Pershing 2 the whole time. And we just couldn't understand this. This was, for our Irish sensibility, we were so, I suppose, shallow in a sense. This was not something that we could identify with. But here's the thing, we talk about how the famine has shaped our psyche. The fact is that the Second World War it plays into significance the effect the Second World War has had on the German psyche. And it had a profound effect on Heinrich Böll. And in 1983, the Soviet Union, the might of the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact, was gathered on German soil. Germany split down the middle, and there was this feeling that we were not in a post-war situation, that we were actually in a pre-war situation. We were told that they could roll over the border and occupy Germany within a week. This is what we were told. So when I think back on that, I think, all this talk about Russia now posing an unprecedented threat. I'm sorry, back in those days, we really thought we were in the middle of this huge crisis. The question I ask when I hear, because look, Heinrich Böll at the time was literally on the street. He was protesting along with Peter Kelly. The German Greens at that stage were a party completely identified with anti-war, anti-militarism. There was no equivocation. Things have changed radically, and I'll talk about that later on. But the question then is, and I listened to Lindsay last night, and this is the question I want to pose here today. I mean, we know that this war is dreadful. We know that Russia and Putin are dreadful, have acted in a most illegal and inhumane way. We know all of that. In fact, I'm very sympathetic to the Ukrainian cause. John mentioned that I'm involved in the film business. I'm helping a colleague at the moment who is based in Kyiv, who's making a documentary about the attack on Kharkiv. And I've rung him a few times, and once when I rang him on the phone, I could hear the sirens in the background, right? And likewise, where I live in Ringsend in Dublin, there's a very brave individual who lives across the way, who goes back and forth driving ambulances in and bringing food across. I'm hugely sympathetic to what is happening. But I'm asking the question, is where do we go from here? And is there any prospect at all of having a peace process? Now, when you're talking about freedom of thought, I have to say to you that if you are to mention this idea in political circles, the political establishment, you're cut down immediately. I mean, you don't want to go there, because people will accuse you immediately of being an appeaser, of being a Putin puppet, and all of these various accusations, which aren't really true, but still, it makes you stop in your tracks, and you don't want to actually, you don't want to go there. Now, I'm not a military expert, but what I do say is this. It seems to me, and I said this at the very start of these hostilities, that this war can go on a very long time. The First World War was mentioned last night. They thought that was going to be over by Christmas, the first year, but it went on for, 5 years. So, and this war could go on a very long time. Trench warfare, okay, there's a few drones up there, but really it's horrific. And Lindsay was right, they don't mention the casualty rate, but likewise, they don't even mention the number of people who have been maimed, Russians and Ukrainians. And so I asked the question, and it's a very strange feeling, that the only person that is really asking this question is none other than the Pope, Pope Francis. Now, I haven't been to church really since 1977, so it's a strange thing that when the only person that is really talking about this in any great detail and making sense to me, when that person is Pope Francis. But that's right now, I don't hear any political voices really talking about this. And we know from our own experience that making peace is difficult. Again, it's forgotten about, but let me remind you that in this country, when John Hume stuck his neck out and put his head above the parapet to talk to the IRA, he was vilified in the establishment press in this country. I remember those columns written by Eamon Dunphy, time and time again. It was the thing that, how could you possibly talk to terrorists? But he knew that risks had to be taken, and he did it. And now we have this peace process. But just to go back, and there are parallels with the situation in Ukraine. Here, in this country, if you want to put it in historical terms, we have an occupying power, still in 6 counties of this country. We have a border. It was the cause of a civil war because there was a peace treaty who said, no, let's have a peace treaty. And they said, no, let's fight on. And that gave rise to the 2 main parties in this country. Likewise, later on, it took a very long time for us to actually talk to the people that were continuing the fight up in the north. And now they, in turn, have, I suppose, changed into the Republican movement we have now, is now the biggest political party on this island, Sinn Féin. So things have changed, and changed quite radically. But the point is this also, that when we embark on this journey, and in politics this can often happen, that you make decisions and there are unforeseen circumstances, unforeseen consequences. And again, Catherine, I'm reminded of your friend John Bruton, and I remember this very clearly. I went to see him when John had just become Taoiseach. I was Lord Mayor of Dublin at the time, and I was 34 years of age. And I'll tell this story against myself here because I'm slightly embarrassed by it. But I went to see him because I wanted to discuss protocol issues in the city of Dublin. And anyway, I said, Taoiseach, I'm the first citizen in this city, and as a result, I should be sitting front at events, and you sit behind me. Now, you would have thought, I mean, when I think back on it, he was well within his rights to say to me, shut the hell up and get out, who do you think you are, you whippersnapper? But he didn't do that. He said, I hadn't thought about that. And then he proceeded to talk about what the pressures were like in government. And he said to me, something that always stayed with me, and it was so true. He said, when you are in government, you cannot strategize. You are firefighting all of the time. And I can tell you, that is so true. You are firefighting. And so it's the same, I think, with our friends in the German Greens, constantly firefighting, same with the parties in government now. And that leads to unforeseen circumstances, unforeseen consequences. So what are the consequences of the Ukraine war and the unforeseen ones? Well, we know that the price of everything went up as a result. Our cost of living crisis started, and that has consequences. And in Germany, what were the consequences? Well, we've had huge increase in support for the AfD. Right? Now the AfD, interesting party. I remember I'm on the German committee, as Catherine knows, of the IEA, and I do recall at a meeting back in 2013, and we were gathered around the table, and I said, this new party, this AfD, they are going to be in the Bundestag. And everybody around said, no, don't think so. No, that's not going to happen. As it happens, in 2013, they didn't reach the 5%. They are there now. And indeed, in some of the eastern states, they're around 30%. Federally, they're around 23%. And they're getting stronger all of the time. And why is that? I think one of the reasons is the war in Ukraine. I think that's a central, it's one of the reasons. It's not just migration, right? And it seems to me that the German Greens are only now beginning to wake up and saying, hold on, there are consequences to this war over a long period of time. Robert Habeck, a man for whom I have great admiration, and I've met him, and I think he's a good guy. But he said recently, we've got to think about where all of this is going, because we are empowering anti-democratic forces, right? Now these forces that we're talking about, and I'm talking about the AfD, but there are others, of course, with Le Pen and all of these people in other countries who are probably sympathetic to the Russians, but there are a number of other things that they stand for. They're not just anti-migration, right? They're anti-European Union, anti-climate change policy, anti-public service broadcasting. They are anti-democratic, and strangely enough, anti-globalization. There was a time when the Greens and the left were anti-globalization, but now they have embraced that whole concept of the free movement of goods, services and people. But there is undoubtedly going to be a consequence. And we see this as well in Europe. I spoke to Kieran Cuff, who's the MEP for Dublin, Green MEP, and he said now it does seem at this stage that it's actually a choice between what they call a grey deal or a green deal, the Green New Deal. The grey deal being investment in armaments. And, of course, climate change is going down the list of priorities. If you invest in armaments, that means you have to invest less money in social protection, less money in climate change technology. That's simply a fact. And the consequences of that, of course, again, is more support for the AFD, because we need, when it comes to climate change, and I see this all the time in my own, when I walk around Ringsend. Ringsend is a working class community. You don't see too many electric vehicles around there. You go down to Sandymount and a lot of people are driving on electric SUVs. So we need to assist people financially to make the transition. You know, it's all about climate justice. It is still, climate change is still the biggest challenge that we face, without a shadow of a doubt. We're going to be here now. We've been here for half an hour now, right? And with another half an hour to go. And within that hour, 30 million tons of ice have melted in Greenland. That's the reality. We're seeing it all the time, and it's heating up all the time. I'm a swimmer. I swim summer and winter, and I can tell you, and I've spoken to the people in Maynooth who monitor this, the sea level is actually rising. You know, when they built places like the 40-foot in Dublin, and when they built Sea Point, they built a kind of a concrete platform, right? And obviously they built it so that at high tide, the platform would be above the water. I can tell you now that every time there's a high tide, the water is coming over the platform. It's there, it's happening. And I contacted people and say, yeah, we know, we've monitored, we know that water is actually rising. We also know that we've experienced the hottest years on record. And yet, we're now in a situation where we're saying, what? Are we really going to invest all of this money in armaments? I think we really need to think this. And I'm just throwing these ideas out here. I know that many of you will have different views on all of this, of all of these matters. But I do think that Heinrich Böll was someone who was so far-sighted that he was able to see these things, many of them, in advance. Böll, he asked the question once, or he made the statement, he said, the true measure of society's progress is not GDP, but the well-being of our citizens. And so, this was a core belief of the Greens and has been for years. In other words, you cannot have infinite economic growth on a finite planet. I've always said that, and that's so obvious, and when you're in government and you're making all of these plans and you're saying we're going to invest in renewable energy and all the rest, and then say, but we're going to increase consumption and growth rates are going to continue on. That's, I have to tell you, in my view, impossible. We will never reach our climate targets if we continue in that way. It's just impossible. It's like someone going to the gym and saying he wants to lose weight, and the person in the gym says, okay, all you have to do is do a little bit of exercise, but not only can you consume as much pizza as you want, but you need to actually eat more. You would say, but that's ridiculous. But that's how we as a society are behaving right now. And so we're investing in alternative technology, but we're consuming more. And we have a dual crisis on this planet. Crisis is not just climate change, but biodiversity loss. And you'll know about this, even on this island, about biodiversity loss. You'll also know that because of climate change, we have, I was talking to people last night and we were saying, I'm doing a documentary about the Dodder and the number of egrets that you see now in this country. They were unheard of. Why are they here? Because of climate change, that's why. And so this crisis is an extraordinary thing because the changes that you see are there within a relatively short space of time. I'm on this planet now over 64 years, nearly 65 years. And in that time, I've seen incredible changes in terms of destruction of nature. And 65 years is tiny when you talk about the millions of years that this planet has been in existence. So those are the points that I wanted to make because I think they're very much in tune with the thinking of Heinrich Böll. And I just wanted to end on one quote because this is how it's sort of what I wanted to do was to provoke a conversation, and I'm hoping that we can have this conversation here this afternoon. This is, again, was recommended by Turlough O'Donnell, who gave this talk a few weeks ago, and it's a Zen koan, or koan. It's one. The whole idea behind this is that is to provoke doubt, because it's only through provoking doubt that you get knowledge. And so what it's a conversation, and it goes as follows. Attention, Jesus asked Hogan, where have you come from? He says, I pilgrimage aimlessly, replied Hogan. What is the matter of your pilgrimage? Asked Jesus. I don't know, replied Hogan. Not knowing is the most intimate, remarked Jesus. At that, Hogan experienced great enlightenment. And that's what I think Heinrich Böll is about. I think Böll is about provoking thought and hoping that we as readers and as citizens actually come to some form of enlightenment. Thank you very much. So, I'll take any questions, any criticism, anything at all. Please go ahead.
John, I heard on the radio, was it this morning or just the other day? Anyway, a farmer talking, it must have been this morning, wasn't it, the farmer program? And he had been working on his own old farm, the family had, and also rented land. And he was a dairy farmer. He had gradually reduced his nitrogen from thousands and thousands of pounds worth every year to nothing. He reduced his cow herd by, let's say, 10 out of 80 or something. So he thought he was doing the right thing. But the land he was renting was being sold. And he couldn't afford to buy it. So it's going to be sold to somebody, and goodness knows who is going to do what with it. And that's what the farmers are up against. It's not just being asked to please do this and please do that. It's they're up against finance coming in like an investment fund for something or other.
Yeah.
Or somebody who's got too much money, so much money they don't want to do it, they buy a bit of land and the farmers, all the work he's done to make his whole enterprise organic, sort of out the window.
Yeah. It's a problem.
I hadn't heard that before, so I was quite struck by it this morning.
Well, I just saw something recently about land prices and
Yeah, that's what they were talking about.
and how land prices are escalating the whole time because, again, investment companies who, as we know, have taken over our housing market, and this is why we have. It's one of the reasons why we have a housing problem. It's not just here, by the way. We see it similarly in Germany as well. But now they're moving into purchasing land, and it's a very difficult problem. You can't. Very few people can compete. You know.
And he went to the bank with his wife, and they put up what they could afford, 18,000 per acre or something like that, and eventually sold for something like 26,000 per acre.
Yeah, incredible.
You see?
Yeah.
And the bank wanted them to go back to putting in as many cows on the land as they possibly could.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You see, this is the problem because you see, the farmers have invested, and they were told, guys, go out, go to the bank, buy you all your sheds and whatever else, right? And they did. Now they've been told you're going to have to reduce, and they say, well, how am I going to pay back the banks? I can't. And they're caught in that bind.
Not only could he not pay back the bank, but once he got to the point, if he did get it for 18,000, he couldn't have used any money. He had no money to do any investment work on the farm.
Yeah.
Improvements or anything.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, those are absolutely.
That's something the government should be thinking about.
I know, and I know, but you see, these are the contradictions of government, I suppose, in that you have three parties. Say, look at the contradictions in Germany, where you have the Greens and the FDP constantly at loggerheads, fighting over this and that, with completely this is a problem, and so you get these contradictory policies. And
selling our land.
I know.
We've gone away from colonialism, and we're now getting another colonialism.
Well, it's dare I say it, it's called capitalism. That's.
Yes. It's also called other things.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Any other points or questions? Yes, sir.
But maybe just to respond, I think we have to be careful when we use the word farmer.
Okay.
Because there are many different forms and shapes between the big agribusiness and the small part-time farmer that we have
Sure.
here in rural Ireland. And I've spent my career, I spent 30 years working in the European Commission in Brussels. I've been through many cycles of biodiversity strategies and plans, and all of which have failed actually to meet their ultimate targets of halting biodiversity loss. And we have very good legislation. Some of it, the proposed nature restoration law is stalled in relation to really a very strong opposition by farmers, which has affected the political landscape, particularly with the more conservative parties, the European People's Party. And I'm not optimistic about that in the near future. You raised the perspective, are we going for a green or a grey agenda in the next cycle, because we're now into a new cycle. I was very optimistic when I retired from the Commission 2 years ago that we were in a green phase. I'm less optimistic now at the moment, at present. And as you say, John, the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis ain't going away. So, we have to find new ways. And of course, the war in Ukraine, it was unimaginable 5 years ago. And what's going on in Gaza as well. So the political landscape and immigration and all these other things has made it much more complicated. I still hope that we will have a green agenda, but it has to be reinvented in terms of getting public support when the mind is elsewhere. And if I look at one of the lessons from my kind of experience, I think when it comes to the green agenda, we're better on the ecology science than we are on the social science. We're better in terms of identifying the problem ecologically rather than actually identifying it socially. And you could see it, in your time in politics with the peatland, the turf cutting and the bogs and all that, in terms of how you can change your behaviour. And I think when it comes to the farmers' community, because they are the main custodians of our nature, our landscape, we need to find better ways in which you work with them. And I honestly, I think that's a failure from Brussels to the national to the local.
Yeah.
That's my take on it at the moment. We have very good things. The Burn, you were down the Burn when the Life Project ended, when you were minister. And there are very good examples, but we've never done it at the scale. And my question to you, looking through your experience, would you agree with that? That we need to find new ways of engaging people, incentivizing them, rewarding them, and maybe disincentivizing the more perverse elements. Easier said than done, because agribusiness is very powerful. be interested in your response, because that's where I feel at the moment.
Well, I agree 100%. I mean, this is the biggest challenge, because of that terrible polarisation between, for want of a better word, the farming community, rural Ireland, and the Green movement. And it's not just here; it's also in, as you say, it's in Germany as well. You see it, and it's as much a perception problem sometimes. And this is why, as a board member of Green Foundation Ireland, I want to get this dialogue going between rural Ireland and the farming community and the Green movement, because there's this gap of understanding. I think they could be much closer. They could see that there are huge benefits. The fact of the matter is that right now, if you go down to rural Ireland and you mention the Greens in any shape or form, I mean, it's a case of, the Greens, like those guys, they're city dwellers, intellectuals, every sort of slur you can imagine, and like it is almost contempt, Now, why? I mean, it's terrible that it has reached this level, but those are the facts, and this is why I think has to be a priority. How do we get greater understanding? You were just saying, yeah.
That farmer I was talking about was perfectly happy with having got his farm to an organic level and having reduced his herd, because he was actually making the right amount of money. He wasn't spending it on nitrogen, and he was making enough, so the whole thing was balanced. He was quite happy, but it was taken out from under him by somebody coming in with a lot of money and buying the land that he'd been renting.
Yeah. I know. I've no doubt there are individual farmers who are fantastic and don't have that jaundiced view either. But I'm just talking in general terms. I think it's true, unfortunately, that there is that perception out there that the Greens, and I'm using it in the general term. I'm not just talking about the political party. I'm talking about for example, if you mention Untashka, which is an environmental organisation, I mean, again, you get a terrible reaction in many rural communities. So to answer the question, I think it's a priority. I think, but you're right. I mean, Bio was a great example of where the farming community actually benefited, and it worked extremely well. Can we replicate that throughout the country? I think it's possible, but I think we've a hell of a long way to go. It's sometimes, it has to be said that at the very upper echelons of the farming organisations, there are people who aren't helping, right? They are stoking those fears very often, instead of actually telling farmers, this could be a win-win situation for you. They're saying, these urban dwellers are trying to ruin our lives, be it in terms of planning, be it in terms of over-regulation, as they keep saying. And you find, in fact, that the very same arguments are used not just here in Ireland, but you see it in Holland, where it got very, it got violent, and likewise in Germany. And France, you're going to see it's going to play out. I think it is probably the most important aspect, the one that we need to address as a matter of urgency. But what's going to happen in the forthcoming elections, I'll be absolutely frank with you and say that I think the Green parties throughout Europe will probably lose seats, right? Because we see this populism now taking hold. I don't even use the word far right. That's just one small element. But you have this populism all over this country, and you will see a hell of a lot of independents, right-wing independents, populist independents, etc., all getting seats in the Europeans and in the local elections. And that, as you know, will determine the future of the European Parliament and how it goes forward. Yes.
I don't think, John, that it's just populism either. For example, the price of fuel is going to go up now, coal and whatever, anything else. Now, who are the people who are going to suffer because of that? And I won't even call them the poor, it's that lower middle income group who can't afford to retrofit their houses, who don't have these mansions that they have in Castleknock.
Yes, yes.
Who can't afford to, do all of this insulation, etc. They're the people that are going to suffer. The small person is squeezed all the time.
Right.
While there's a war going on in Ukraine, carbon, there's a war going on in Israel, the industrialization of China and America and all of the rest of it. They're not suffering. It's the people, almost like myself. I'm on a teacher's pension. I'm not poor, thank God I'm not poor, I have a good pension. But I depend on my stove every winter.
Sure. Yeah.
I depend on my stove. And if I don't, I have the money to buy a heat pump and to buy all the other things that,
Yeah.
So it's not populism, it's reality for a lot of people.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that absolutely, and that's why I referred to it earlier on, that unless we make that investment, we're going to alienate more people. More and more people. I mean, I met this guy the other night. He's 30 years of age, and he said to me, John, it's like this. He said, I don't want to vote for Sinn Féin, he said, but like young people at this stage have no choice. Where are we going to go? Where are we going to go? What's the choice? And I think it's the same all throughout Europe, where people feel that they've run out of options. They feel that the mainstream parties haven't actually dealt with a lot of the issues that are of concern to them. And so, I don't believe, for example, in Germany, that a lot of the people who vote, I know you want to use the microphone, this is something I'm very familiar with because I do filming myself, and I know that you have to stay close to the microphone so that you can film it. But the fact is that in Germany even, a lot of people who vote for the AfD are similar. They just say, a plague on all your houses. I don't know who to vote for anymore. I think I'll just vote for the AfD. Even though they, like a lot of the policies, they may not be aware of some of the policies, but it's just this reaction. And so I think that certainly, if you look at the controversy caused in Germany from the heat pump, this was a big discussion. People felt, oh, the Green Party are off, they have no concept of reality. Do you know how much money this is going to cost me as an individual? And we have to be aware of that. I'm acutely aware of it because I live in a working class constituency. I think I was the one Green that got a very strong, over the years, a very strong working class vote. Most Greens don't get working class votes, they actually get a very strong middle class vote. I got some middle class votes as well, but the strongest vote I got was in working class areas, which is extremely unusual for a Green Party representative. And so I've always felt that if we were to make the changes and want to bring people with us, that was another thing that someone said to me, that you've got to bring the people with you. How do we do that? Well, we don't do it by persecuting them and making their life difficult. And some of the changes, unfortunately, I mean, who can afford, as I said, you go around Ringsend, there isn't a single person that I can see with an electric car, right? But in Sandymount, just down the road, they've got some of them in these huge electric SUVs, right? Yeah. And how we're going to solve the climate crisis even with electric SUVs is beyond me, frankly. But anyway, yes.
This is a naive question. I mean, a lot of plague on all your houses is media driven. But in post-Christian Ireland and secularised Ireland, the one issue that inspires, say, the young teenagers, say 14, 15, 16, before they have to get worried about exams, are green climate issues. Should we reduce the voting age to 16? Would that help? And how do you persuade that cohort which didn't vote at Brexit with disastrous results because they thought it was going to concern them?
Yeah.
How can you bring about a climate change that this enthusiasm is turned into politically active citizens?
You know, you're asking an interesting question here, because it's something. I used to think this was a great idea. We'll reduce the voting age to 16, and yes, it might benefit the Greens, but I don't know in all conscience could we do it. Because, I don't know. I mean, there are times, having been an elected representative, where I felt, in fact, that the voting age for men should be increased to 43, and for women to 35 or something. You know, I mean, it's just that you come across the most incredible. Sometimes you will come across people that just don't seem to have any idea what the hell is going on, and 16-year-olds are probably even worse. So I don't know. I think there's sometimes just this idea that you don't know how can we do it? How can 16-year-olds are the thing that really influences them at the moment is TikTok, right? And so we have what we now call the TikTok Taoiseach, and he seems to understand it and that medium, and is doing pretty well on it. The other party that does very well on TikTok, and it won't surprise you, is Sinn Féin, and they have, and it is noticeable. I find it very noticeable that the message pumped out by Sinn Féin is parroted back by 16, 17-year-olds, right up, that whole generation. I've heard it said to me more and more, saying, there's nothing for us in this country. This country is finished. Now, okay, there are problems in this country, but I can tell you, if you go back to the early 1980s, there's still a lot more employment, there's still a lot more stuff going on.
Or the 1950s.
Or the 1950s. 1950s, 1980s were bad times in this country. But we have a generation now, and I know a lot of them personally, a lot of them out in Melbourne, in Australia, and they're saying, there's nothing for us in Ireland. Now, it's fantastic. They're having a good time out in Australia, but the idea that they are back in the 1950s and the 1980s is nonsense. But that's the narrative that they have embraced. It's working. It's working for the Sinn Féin party. I'm not a Sinn Féin basher, by the way. I never have been. And indeed, when I was talking about standing in elections and getting a good working class vote, I also happened to get a huge transfer from Sinn Féin. That's because I suppose it was from a working class vote. So I don't engage in Sinn Féin bashing, but I'm just telling you what I'm picking up from that younger generation. So if we are to communicate on climate change to that generation, I suppose we're going to have to get better at social media. We're going to have to try and understand where they're coming from, because they're a very conflicted generation, Generation Z as well, or Generation Z, because on the one hand, they are concerned about climate change. Although one thing I do notice is that when Greta Thunberg went out and protested, fine, they all came out on the streets, but then they just disappeared. Like Fridays for Future, do you know who's gathered for Fridays for Future outside the door now? A bunch of 50-something-year-olds, and they're gone, the kids are gone. They're gone, it's like, couldn't be bothered anymore, right? That's how they get bored easily, and they also, like the privileges that come with the modern lifestyle, they want to get on the Ryanair flight because it's cheap, right? And so they know that climate change is an issue, but at the same time, they want the privileges. And can I just say this, that when I talk about the urgency of climate change, in this country, you think back to the 1940s, we were not involved in the war, but and we referred to this situation in this country, we called it the emergency, right? And so, when you think about it, John is indicating that I better stop. Are you indicating that I should stop? Okay. 5 minutes, right? Like, most cars in this country back in the emergency were up on blocks. Only the very necessary, the doctor or whatever had the car. People grew their own food, right? This was a situation. And I guarantee you that our carbon emissions at that stage were like zero, right? But we're now in a situation, and I've heard people say this over and over again, Greens included, say, we can, we need to get back to a population of 8 million. We've had it during famine times. We can easily sustain that. You won't reach a single climate target, right? You won't reach a single climate target if we go back there. And we need to recognise reality here. We're not recognising reality right now. Policymakers are pretending, that's what I'm saying earlier on, that we can consume and cut at the same time. That's not possible. It's not possible. And people keep telling you, this is how we can do it. We can consume and consume, we can grow at 5% annually and yet reduce our emissions drastically. I don't think it's possible. Maybe people in this room think it's possible. I don't think it's possible. So, but I don't want to end on that note, John. So, is there any last question, very quickly, and then we'll go, okay?
I'd like to think that the government would support the farmer who's done the right thing. That's what worries me, that they're not getting supported. This poor farmer that's done all the right things, done well, can do it economically from his own point of view, is not being supported. Somebody is letting the land he was using be sold.
Okay, well that's a good point. Gisela?
Yeah.
So to end on a positive note, what gives you most hope?
What gives me most hope, and this is an unusual one. What gives me hope is the resilience of nature, right? Nature will always find a way, right? Now, whether that includes the human species or not, I don't know, but I do know that nature, I live in Ringsend, and we have in our garden now, in the middle of a city, we have 2 badgers, right? When you see that nature can thrive, at the moment you have the biggest building project in the country on the glass bottle site in Ringsend, right? But that site, within 5-6 years, nature had reconquered that entire site. We had every type of tree, grass. We had the badgers. The badgers moved when they started construction there, and they had to come down here. So we have badgers, foxes, the whole lot, right? And so nature, despite everything, we know this as well from the experience in Chernobyl and places like that. Nature comes back. Nature has that resilience, and if we work with nature, we can make it happen. But that's the thing. The one thing that always gives me that sense of hope, that it can be destroyed easily, but it can come back as well, and that's the one thing that I'm clinging to. All right.